Welcome to chapter 3, the book of Isaiah. These chapters go into such detail describing things of the Jews, of what they did and what is going to happen, good and bad. And as I go through here, I feel like, well, I'm reading these and going through the things that are bad that people could construe me as being anti-Semitic. But I'm going through the Bible, and this is what God has written down. Now, some of the things that I see are my opinion, and maybe somebody would say, well, if he sees that, then maybe he is anti-Semitic, but so be it. I don't think I am, as far as I have a lot of Jewish friends, and I respect them, even ones that are not believers in Jesus. So with that, we'll go into this third chapter, which is a very interesting. It goes into what's going to happen to the Jews that are in Judea, in Jerusalem, that is bad. And to me, it reminds me somewhat of the Holocaust. When we get in there, I'll point things out that it reminds me of. And then I think about the Holocaust, and then I know that the Jews insist that it happened, which I believe it did, just as history points out and the facts point out. I'm not somebody that denies it at all, but because they insist on it, then therefore they confirm this prophecy of Isaiah in chapter 3, that they must have been doing something wrong to have incurred such behavior. Now, again, that's my opinion, and maybe some people would disagree with that and think that they were doing all good things maybe, and God unjustly punished them. I suppose a person could think that way, but let's read the chapter here and see what it has to say. Behold, indeed, the despotes, the master, a despot is a translator, derivative. The Lord Sabaoth of hosts has to do with the military, a powerful being. God is described in many ways in the Bible, and the Lord of the military is one of the ways he's described. He shall remove from Jerusalem and from Judea the prevailing man and the prevailing woman. Now, Isaiah is writing this at 783 BC. Now, he's going to remove Jerusalem and Judea. So now we have to look at that and say, well, if he's prophesying of the Jerusalem being taken by Nebuchadnezzar, then that's 200 years later in 587 BC. If he's prophesying the Romans, then that would be 853 years later of this time that he's writing. And if he is predicting the beast and the destruction of Jerusalem, which I believe is going to happen, it's shown in the book of Revelation, then he would be predicting 2,800 years earlier than that happens, or more. Might not be happening right away, may not, I don't know when it'll be, but at least 2,800 years, because that's where we are today. So this prediction or prophecy of the Lord of hosts removing from Jerusalem the prevailing man and the prevailing woman, that is, the important leaders, people. The strength of bread. So it's going to be a later Jerusalem was surrounded by the enemy, and there was a famine as far as the bread in Jerusalem. The strength of water. The giant, giganta, a giant, giganta is a transliteration. And the one prevailing, anybody that's strong. And anthropon, a man, polymistine, polemics, derivative, you can add that number to your English derivatives book. A man, warrior, soldier, general or so forth, a magistrate, judges, and a prophet, and the thinker and old man. Presbytine, prophetine is a transliteration. Presbytine, we have a Presbyterians, church of elders, and the Pentekontarchon. You can add that to your English derivatives book. Pentakon, Pente is 5, and archon, a ruler, a fifth, and tone makes it 50. Pentecost, 50 days. Derivative. And the wonderful counselor and the wise architect. Now, the wonderful counselor, it's interesting that one place it mentions that as Jesus, the wonderful counselor. So I wonder here if he's actually seeing Jesus being removed, but not by the Romans, well, sort of by the Romans and the Jews together. The Sophon architectona. Does that sound familiar? It's a transliteration of architect. The discerning listener. So all of these are going to be gone. And I will set young men as archontas, as their rulers. So it sounds like Nebuchadnezzar, the young men that were the soldiers became the rulers, or the Romans, the young soldiers became their rulers. And mockers will lord over them, people that mock them, because they've destroyed Jerusalem and Judea, either the Romans or the Babylonians. And the people will be downcast, man against man. Even a man will be against his neighbor. Well, now that reminds me of going forward into the Holocaust. They had what's called the Judenrat in Germany. Wikipedia says the Nazis systematically sought to weaken the resistance potential and opportunities of the Jews of Eastern Europe. The early Judenrat were foremost to report numbers of their Jewish populations, clear residences, and turn them over, present workers for forced labor, confiscate valuables, which we'll see here is what happened, and collect tribute and turn these over. Failure to comply would incur the risk of collective punishment or other measures. Later tasks of the Judenrat included turning over community members for deportation. So here it's exactly what it's saying. A man, it's talking about Jews, it's not talking about the nations. A man will be against a man, even a man will be against his neighbor, which they were in the Warsaw Ghetto. The boy will strike against the old man, and the one without honor against the important. And then verse 6, for behold, a man shall take hold of his brother, or a member of the family of his father, saying, you have a garment, you become our chief, and let my food needs be under you. They don't have anything, so they look at somebody else to take over this job. But what happens? In answering, in that day he will say, I will not be your archigos, your chief, for there is not bread in my house, nor a garment. I will not be a chief of this people. So the Nazis took all the clothes and the goods, confiscated everything from the Jews during the late 30s in Germany. Very well could be what he's talking about right here. For Jerusalem is forsaken, and Judea is cast down. Well, now, if it's tying it into Jerusalem, then the Nazi period, Jerusalem was not inhabited by the Jews, so it could very well be talking about the earlier time of either the Romans or the Babylonians. And their tongues speak with lawlessness the things against the Lord, resisting persuasion. Now, there's a very interesting word here of resisting persuasion, number 544. I highly recommend that as a word study. It's not very many places. Excuse me. the resisting of persuasion. A few places I wrote down here. In John 3:36, it says, "The one believing in the Son has life eternal, but the one resisting persuasion in the Son shall not see life, but the anger of God remains upon him." Now the persuasion in I added in the italic in John 3:36. So resisting the persuasion. So this was the time of the Romans, right before the Romans. And then it says in Romans 15:31 that I should be rescued, this is Paul is speaking, from the ones resisting persuasion among the Jews. So again, this is the time right before the Romans, this resisting persuasion. You'll see this theme used quite a bit there at that time, of their resisting persuasion, to pointing out these things in the Bible that showed that Jesus is who he was, who he says he was, and is God in the flesh, our deliverer. But if they resist it, then people are resisting that, then that's what they are. Then they are following what Isaiah has said right here. And it continues, "For now their glory was abased, and the shame of their face withstood them," the ones that resisted the persuasion, "and they announced their sin as Sodom and revealed it. Woe to their soul, for they consulted wicked counsel against themselves. And having said, we should bind the just one," there is another key there for who it is, "for he is inconvenient to us." The crucifixion of Jesus in Matthew 27:25, it says, Pilate says, "I am innocent of the blood of this just one." So he is pointing out that he is just. And the Jews, you see to it because they wanted to crucify him. In responding, all the people, or the Jews, said, "His blood is upon us and our children." Matthew 27:25. He's inconvenient to us. "Therefore the produce of their works they shall eat." In 70 AD they were destroyed and taken away from Jerusalem and Israel. "Woe to the lawless one! Evils according to the works of his hands shall come to pass against him." So and now with us, if we're doing things that are lawless, then it's going to come back upon us. So we, the Christians, have a lot to learn here. "O my people, your exactors glean you, and the ones exacting, wanting money, lord over you. O my people, the ones declaring you blessed mislead you, and they disturb the roads of your feet." So the rulers and the clergy misleading. Sounds familiar? We have it today in the United States. "But now the Lord will place in judgment, and will stand his people in judgment." So I believe that goes for the Jews and to the Christians if they are no longer following the things of God. "The Lord himself shall come for judgment with the elders of the people and with his rulers." So Jesus did come, and the elders did. Nicodemus was an elder, and his rulers. "But you, why did you set on fire my vineyard? And the seizure of the poor is in your houses." The vineyard, as you can see, is Israel. And verse Matthew 21 goes into the vineyard in description of what God and the vineyard and Christ and the Jews. "Why do you wrong my people and disgrace the face of the poor, says the Lord of the stration, the militaries, and earlier the Sabaoth, which is a Hebrew transliteration into Greek. But here we have the Greek word stration, the strategy in militaries. The Lord of the militaries, the same thing. So a lot of this has to do with the judgment, I think, with some type of a war or so forth, battles. Verse 16, thus says the Lord, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and that's Jerusalem, and they go with a high neck. Now, I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about here. Perhaps if you're Jewish and you know how the Jewish women act and go, you will see something here that I don't see, because I really have not been to Israel, and I don't know how the Jewish women in the United States, they're different, but they're not. We'll read this and you can see for it yourself. And they go with a high neck. Imagine that would be some type of a pride. Trachylon is trachea, comes from that. It's a throat in the neck. And with the beckon of the eyes, ophthalmon, and their goings of the feet together, dragging their inner garments, and their feet playing together, therefore the Lord will abase the ruling daughters of Zion, and the Lord will uncover their condition. Now again, this goes back to me where I know they were taken naked by Shalmaneser and the Israelites. And so now what Nebuchadnezzar, if he uncovered their nakedness, I don't know, or the Romans, but we know that the Nazis did, and stripped them of their clothes and put on rags. And in that day even the Lord will remove the glory of their clothes, and the fringes, and the crescents, and the necklace and the ornament of their face, and the array of the ornament of glory, and the armlets and the bracelets, and the wreaths and the rings, and the right armbands, and the earrings, and the objects edged with purple, and the things ornamented in purple, and the cloths for the house, and the transparencies of laconica, and the fine linens, and the ones of blue and scarlet, and the linen being interwoven with gold and blue, and the lightweight coverings for divans or sofas. And so all of these things the Nazis took and stripped them and sent them to the concentration camps. And there will be a cloud of dust instead of scent, an agreeable scent. So here I see, what do I see? I see the crematoriums, the dust, the bodies. You see pictures of it, and the Jews point this out, that this is the case. And it's not an agreeable scent, because it's the dead bodies, and they could smell the smoke from these crematoriums into the cities that were close by in Germany. It was terrible, a terrible odor. So this is, and it's a scent, generally, in a cloud of dust, to me, seems like some type of a burning situation. And instead of a belt, you shall tie around with a rough cord. And I see these pictures of the women in the concentration camps with these sackcloths on them with a rope around them. And it's exactly as he's saying here, thousands of, almost 3,000 years earlier. And instead of a gold ornament for the head, you shall have baldness on account of your works. And I see pictures of the Jewish women in these concentration camps. They're sitting there shaving all their heads. They have pictures of it, movies of it. You can see it happening. Nazis took pictures of this. How much more can a description can it be of what happened then? And instead of the inner garment of the thing ornamented in purple, you shall gird on sackcloth, which they did in the concentration camps. And your best son, whom you love, shall fall by the sword, and your young ones shall fall by the sword and shall be abased. And they were in the concentration camps. And the cases, that's a place you put, little box you put your of your ornamentation, shall mourn. Well, that's a figure of speech. The box doesn't actually mourn, but it's a figure of it. Basically, you shall be left behind alone. There's nothing going to be in that box, jewelry. And you'll be alone, and into the earth you shall be dashed. And they were thrown into these pits and shot. And these were all things that the Jews are very intent to let the world know that these things happened. Now, they blame the Nazis, which is rightfully so. And they may blame other people, but what about God? Can you blame God? if he's saying, if you do these things and you walk away, you burn my vineyard, you ignore the just one, can you blame God if he allows you to go through all these things? Now, I'm not saying this to put people down or ashamed, because the word itself, but reach out to Jesus Christ and don't resist the persuasion of your rulers, of your rabbis, or of anybody, and become a person that's born from the Spirit and become a person of the way of Christ, and you will find a rest and I think a better way of life, and you don't have to go along with the past laws of the Torah and all of these things, because Christ has set you free of all of these things. And so with that, we will finish chapter 3, and then we'll go into chapter 4. Here's now uplifting to me the renewal of Zion. So chapter 3 was definitely on the side that would be, I don't know what you would call it, dismal future. Hopefully here's a positive future. Hope you'll join us in chapter 4, and God bless.